Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. In today's video I'm going to be talking to you about some of the books that I want to finish before the end of the year. Don't know if that's going to happen. We're going to be talking about books that have been sort of in my currently reading for a while, and then 2 books that I definitely want to pick up, or 3 books that I definitely want to pick up before the end of the year. There are not that many days left in December for me to get to these books, but I am confident actually that I will get to them, and not only will I get to them, but I will finish them. So yes, fingers crossed. It's just because they're 2 books and one of them is a poetry collection in terms of the ones that I want to start reading that I haven't actually picked up. There are like 2, 3 other ones that I don't know, but we're going to talk about them. So really in no particular order we will talk about them, so I can just mix them up for you. So the first is The Source. I think I've been reading this since October, and since I put it down on like the 70-page mark, I haven't picked it up. I thought I'd continue reading it for non-fiction November. That didn't happen, and then in the month of December I haven't picked it up. This is very much a self-help book, so I said this a couple of times about this book because I've mentioned it in a book haul and then in my sort of non-fiction TBR. But the author of this actually is one of the sort of like, I guess, guest experts on this podcast that I listen to, although I haven't listened to it in a while. And yeah, she's a doctor, she's a psychologist, I think she is. She's a neuroscientist, and she's written this book, The Source, which is basically talking about the brain, but very much how you can rewire your brain. So it says here, now world-renowned neuroscientist Dr. Tara Swart shows how we can all harness this potential to transform our minds, attract what we most desire, and seize the life-changing opportunities that pass us by every day. The secret isn't in mysterious forces, but in the incredible power of the source. Now, so the first bit that I've read so far is very much talking about the brain and like different parts of the brain and whatnot, and not in such a science or clinical way, but also kind of in that way, and I've just found it very hard to connect with that. There are also journal prompts in this book, so at the end of the chapter that I've sort of finished, there is a journal prompt, and I think I'm actually on the 2nd chapter. I think one of the things I'm quite lazy with is actually doing journal prompts alongside books that have those kind of things, and I think it really is the best way to sort of access this book and actually like get from it what she's aiming to teach you. But I'm very lazy when it comes to things like that, so I think I might have to start from the beginning, actually do the journal prompts, and like I don't think giving it a reread, like those 70 pages of reread, is the worst idea in the world. It might actually help some of these ideas and explanations actually sink into my head. But yeah, that is one book that I should be finishing for the end of December. I don't know how that will go, but I will take it down to London with me in the hope that I will actually read it. The next book I'm going to speak about is A Murder of a Lady, a Scottish mystery by Anthony Wine. Guys, not gonna lie, this is gonna be the next book I pick up. I'm so excited to read this book. I don't know why I keep thinking because it's like a British Library crime classic that I'm like, oh, it's a Christmas read, it's a December read. How are you putting this together? I think it's because I've seen a lot of people talk about the British Library crime classics, and they talk about like they feature some Christmas mysteries and stuff like that. So in my head I've sort of associated that with this, but it's really not the same at all. This takes place in the Scottish castle, and if I'm remembering correctly, because I did speak about this in my book haul, a woman is found dead in a room in a castle, because obviously every Scottish person has a castle. Watched The Castle for Christmas last night. Absolutely hilarious, because it was just being roasted. My boyfriend is Scottish and my friend is Scottish, and they were just completely roasting the film. But I found it very enjoyable to watch with 2 Scottish people and just be like, I hope both of you have castles that I can come to, because clearly I've been living in the wrong side of Scotland. But anyway, back to this. So yeah, I actually do think this is genuinely a castle. Yeah, they're in the Scottish Highlands at least. Yeah, it is a castle. And this is a locked room mystery. So the woman gets killed in the room, and the only, I think, bit of evidence that's there is like a fish scale or something. And the servants in the house all talk about how she's a really like nice person, but I think as the sort of inspector and also the amateur sleuth discover that like these people are kind of covering up and though she wasn't really a nice person. And also I think someone also believes, yeah, superstitious locals believe that the fish creature from nearby waters are responsible. It's got that element of superstition in there, which I'm not a huge fan of because obviously we know it's going to be bloody bullshit. But it's also got an amateur sleuth and a detective, and it's a locked room mystery, so I'm really intrigued to see how that plays out. Like I said, this is the book that I'm going to pick up next, so I feel like I will definitely finish this before the end of December if I find it very like captivating. It is only 267 pages long, so it's not very long. I actually feel like it looks about like it's 300 pages long, but it's not. So it's not very long, and you know, it's probably going to be my last fiction book of 2021, so why not try and go out on a high note and also just delve into reading more detective crime books that are not Agatha Christie, because that's basically what I've been doing. I'm now trying to branch out of that and read some other ones. The next one to speak about is actually a poetry collection, and I have a feeling I would definitely finish this off before the end of the year, unless I don't like it, and then in that case it would linger in the currently reading and just be there forever, it seems. But this would be my final poetry collection for the year. I think I tried to average it out, so I read one poetry collection a month. I think I've read less than 12 poetry collections, which, you know, I'm not mad at. But overall, like, I'm very happy with how I've continued with my poetry reading. So this, I don't even know that much about. This is one of those books that were recommended to me on Goodreads, and I find that Goodreads recommendations can really be hit and miss, because all they do is group of books that I feel like have come out at a similar time and sort of seem similar, and then say, if you enjoyed this, you should read this. Sometimes I look at the recommendation and, you know, what it's based it off of, and I'm like, I've read both of those and I would not recommend those. So yeah, this was recommended to me though, and I clicked onto it and I thought, you know what, that sounds really interesting. I haven't come across this author before, this poet before, and I haven't heard anyone else talking about her. Yeah, so her name is Sandra Cisneros, and this is called Loose Women. And it says here it's by the author of House on Mango Street, which I think is also a poetry collection. So it says here, with her novel, The House, oh sorry, I lied. With her novel, The House on Mango Street, Sandra Cisneros introduced one of the most lyrically inventive voices ever to emerge from the barrier. Now she gives us a book of poems with the lilt of nocturnal music and the romantic abandon of a hot Saturday night, celebrating the catalysms of love and mapping the fault lines in Mexican-American psyche. Loose Women is by turns baldy and introspective, flagrantly erotic and unabashedly funny, a work that is both a tour de force and a triumphant outpouring of pure soul. So from what I've read about this on Goodreads as well, which I'm sure the blurb is probably the same, but it's the fact that it has a sort of erotic sense to it. I don't think the poems are like full on erotic or anything like that. But also the fact that it's from that sort of her perspective of a Mexican American. Those were the two things that drew me to this, and I don't actually think I've read a collection like this. So when I saw it, I was like, that actually sounds quite intriguing. I read a lot of, obviously this is coming from a Western perspective as well in terms of being American, but I read a lot of poetry that comes from the UK or that comes from America. I don't think I've read any other poems from elsewhere. I probably have, but predominantly those are the kind of collections that I end up picking up. So when I saw this, I was like, actually, this might be really nice. It might be a different style. It could just very well be the same style. I feel like I might get a sort of different vibe than I get from the poetry collections that I usually read, so that's great. One of the things I actually wanted to do for 2021 was actually read more poems and actually books from Indigenous authors. I only managed to read Love Poems by Natalie Diaz, which I enjoyed, to be fair. So next year there will be a little bit more focus on that, and just poems from all over the globe really, barring, probably including of course UK and the Americas, but predominantly don't want to focus in them. So really excited to read this. I hope I like it, because if I do, there's no reason why I can't finish this by the end of December. A book I've been reading for a long time, again before Black History Month, so before October probably I would say, is Finding the Music Inside Your Inner Algorithm to a More Meaningful Life by Reynolds. I've spoken about this book quite a bit in other videos, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here. Do you know what? I actually really like this book. I like the messaging behind this book and what this book is trying to tell me. I just don't think it's that well written, and therefore it's not that it's not well written, it's not structured enough, and a lot of things are repeated and we're going from like time, like different, it's not chronological, which not being chronological is not an issue in most books, but this just jumps from place to place, and I just find it quite confusing, and I feel like some of the messages are repeated over and over again, and I think that would be fine if it was just in one chapter, so that we learn from that particular section all the lessons that he's learned, like, you know, in performing on stage and stuff like that, and then what he's learned from his parents. If they were in different chapters, then it would make sense. But when they're, as in, you know, their own chapter, but when we're in chapter 3 and we're still repeating things that sort of happened in chapter 1, I'm just a bit like, but we already know this. So that's why I am struggling with it. Yeah, it lacks structure, and perhaps just a bit more editing and retuning is what I would say. But I really intrigued by the messaging behind this. I think Reynolds has a really positive attitude, and I completely vibe with what he's trying to say and telling people, so that's why I want to continue reading it. But yeah, I am just having a hard time in that sense. I'm now on chapter 5. I'm on page 115, and this book is about 320 pages long. So I don't know that it's going to be a book that I'm going to take down to London with me, because at the moment I probably have, what, 3 books that I'm going to take down to London with me, and I just don't want to be carrying that many books, in all honesty. But I didn't actually say what this book is about. It's very unhelpful. So this is about, so Reynolds is an MC, and he basically chronicles his life from like the I was going to say the 90s, that's when I was born, but I think probably like 1980s, 1970s, about, yeah, at the 80s, at the height of social unrest in the 80s, and emerging culture sparked me into life. I was a founding member of a pioneering UK hip-hop trio, the London Rhyme Syndicate. This is my journey of discovery and becoming. And he talks about that, seeing what life was like at that time. You know, it's not just talking about the music, he talks about his personal life as well, what was going on in his personal life, but also what was happening in like London and the different boroughs in London at that time, sort of, you know, things to do with police killing other black men, and just how that sort of feeling spread into the communities that he was in, and just, yeah, what it was like also touring and how clubs were treating them and things like that. So it is a real mixed bag, and that's what makes it so interesting. But yes, for all the reasons I spoke about before, is the reason why like I haven't been able to pick it up as much, and I'm hoping that I will finish it before the end of this year, but I don't know. A book that I want to start reading is Brown Girl in the Ring, Memoirs of a Brown Girl Living in Scotland. This was sent to me by the author, and I really want to pick it up this month, and finish it before the end of this month, because when I think about it, this is the only other sort of non-fiction that I would be picking up that I haven't, like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm starting, if I was to start 2 new books in the sort of way that I read, it usually is a fiction book, a poetry collection, a non-fiction book, and then listening to something on audio. And I'll tell you what I'm actually currently listening to on audio in a second. But I really want to read this. Like, when the author like reached out to me and I saw what the premise was about, I was like, I'm so here for it. And it sounds like such a fascinating story. She sounds like an absolutely fascinating person. She's Nigerian, so Olukemi, she's Nigerian. And I just want to find out what life was like in Scotland, you know, during these times. So I think this goes back to like I think we're talking about Scotland in the 1980s or the 70s or something like that. Let me just double check. So I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I would say it's about that time. And she talks about her struggle growing up as a mixed race child in Scotland. She describes in horrific, gut-wrenching detail the treatment she received at the hands of so-called good people of Scotland, acts of racism that continued into adulthood and wreaked havoc for her as a wife and a mother of 4 children. So I really want to pick this up. I don't think I'm going to wait until I finish like my other non-fiction reads to pick this up. I'm just going to pick it up, but because I don't know, I just have this calling to it. I definitely really want to pick it up before the end of the year. I'm also really intrigued to this on a very personal note, because more than likely my children are going to be mixed race, so, and they're going to grow up in Scotland, so obviously the account is not going to be the same for everyone, but I have that very much personal interest in it as well. Let's talk about that audiobook, because I know I would definitely finish it, but I'm currently listening to it at the moment. And this is An Elderly Lady Must Not Be Crossed, and this is the second in the collection. I can't remember what the first one is. No, the first one is An Elderly Lady Is Up to No Good. I actually listened to this off of the recommendation of Courtney Ferrier, and you know, I was just looking for something light to read, and it's, you know, crime and all that sort of stuff. And this is so funny. She's like, this woman Maud is like this how do you say this word? Octogenarian? Guys, I have no idea. But she an octi whatever. And I can't remember what country she lives in. Like, I would say Sweden or something. I don't know. But it's so funny in this book, because Maud just be getting people out of the way. Any small, no, I was going to say any small inconvenience, that's a lie. It's not usually a small inconvenience. It's quite a huge threat to her in some way. She just be getting people out of the way. And in the first book, you know, the first book it doesn't end on a cliffhanger, but it does end with, yet again, another crime and someone has died, and this crime is being investigated by the police, and I think Maud is in a little bit of a pickle. So in this second book, it essentially picks up off where the last book ended, and Maud is just brilliant. You know, she really knows how to feign just being that old woman that's really helpless, that people were just like, oh my god, she doesn't really know what's happening and stuff like that. But Maud is on it. Like, Maud is not silly, she's not stupid, she's perfectly on it. She's so capable, she's sharp. The book is very witty and just hilarious, and you know, it's one of those things where she is committing murder, so you know, she's not a great woman. When she explains her reasoning, you're kind of like, oh, okay. And in the second book, we're essentially finding out more about Maud's history and maybe about some more skeletons in the closet there. So that's one that I hope to finish by the end of this year. I've only got one more day of work left at the moment, so I'm going to also try and figure out when I'm actually going to be able to listen to this, because I'll be busy for like the rest of the year really, but we'll see. The final book I'm going to speak about is collection, really. New Daughters of Africa, edited by Margaret Busby. You guys will probably recall me talking about this book at the beginning of the year because I got it in December 2020. And now I've not finished it. And you know, it is a huge book, so people might be like, well, of course you've not finished it, but it's not because it's huge I've not finished it, it's because I honestly keep forgetting to pick it up. Because it's not something that I've read in a linear fashion, I will dive into stories and then completely forget. I do note down on my phone like what pages I've read and things like that, but I did start off reading it in a linear way. But because this book is split by the years, so it actually starts pre-1900s and the 1900s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and a lot of it was just, especially if it featured American authors, was talking about slavery and civil rights in America and things like that. And once you read a couple of them, you're kind of like, okay, I want to read something else. So I have read like some other poems and like short stories in here, maybe perhaps an essay as well, but I really want to read more of this. I'm not going to finish this before the end of the year. There is like absolutely no way, but it's something I want to have made a little bit more progress on, so that actually next year I will definitely be able to finish it. If you are interested in like hearing more about this book, I will link my book haul where I talk more about this book so you can hear more about it in full detail. So that's it for this video. That is it for the books that I hope to finish by the end of the year. Do you have any books that are sort of sitting there in limbo that you sort of picked up but actually haven't finished, haven't like had the inclination to pick up, and actually thinking, right, before the end of the year, I definitely want to pick this up? You know, for me, it's never about like, I've read this many books in this year, so I need to like finish and get to this hard deadline of a goal. I never set myself a goal for books to read in a year. I would just like to clear them off my list so that they're off my Goodreads list and off my sort of mind, and also they're not physically in front of me staring me in the face like you haven't finished reading this. So that's all for today's video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in another one. Bye!